Ubloo Part 3. This is Part 3 of Ubloo series. The remaining and final part will be I'll have up in the next day or so. I watched the white lines in the middle of the highway disappear one by one under the hood of my car as I sped down the interstate. If I watched them long enough, they would eventually just bleed into one long haze line of white and a sea of asphalt, and then I would snap out my stare, and they would be separate again. I reached over the passenger side seat and grabbed my pint of gin. It's sad how good I've gotten at twisting the cap off with one hand, while the other on the wheel. I took a big swig and finished the bottle, then tossed it out my driver's side window, and heard the glass shatter and a terrifying splash. It had to have been Michael's sleep, I know, telling myself. I don't know if I was finally starting to lose it or if I'd already drunk too much by noon and just rambling. But I had to somehow realize that the fact I'd seen Ubloo and not heard him afterwards. In the end, I checked up to hallucinations booked on by the lack of sleep, and told myself I would try to get at least 5 hours tonight. For the past few weeks, I've been running on just about 4 hours a night, or however long I can stomach these terrifying nightmares. In my rearview mirror, I checked on the box that housed Robert Jenkins' things. Today was finally the day I would learn what the box meant. I can't tell you how long I compared this writing to samples on my laptop for, and it was until I very blind stroke of luck that I figured out it actually was. I was sitting at a hotel bar in Pennsylvania where a man sat next to me. We made some small talk at first, but I think he was scared off a bit by my disheveled appearance. We drank in silence for a few minutes, and then he broke it abruptly. "You can read that shit crap," he said, all but gracefully. "Unfortunately, no," I shrugged. "In fact, I'm just trying to figure out what language it is, to be completely honest." "Oh!" He looked down at his beer and started looking at the label. "Mind if I take a look?" "Sure, just be careful with it." I said the book over to him carefully. He opened the front cover and flipped through the first couple pages. "Well, I tell you," he began, "it's some sort of African writing." My ears perked up at this. "African?" I asked hopefully. "Yeah, I used to be a security guard at the Natural History Museum over in New York City. I swear I saw some crap just like this in there. I didn't even bother thanking the man. I grabbed the book from him and sprinted up to my hotel room and began working. I must have wrote down near 500 emails that night. Well, a small sample of the writing attached to every African history professor, museum curator, and African language translator. I couldn't could find an address for. That's how I met Eli. Eli was a retired African history professor living in Natchez, Mississippi. The email he sent back attached a little surprised and accepted all at once. He told me that this writing was almost extinct language that he learned translating documents for a professor while studying for his doctorate. I told him that I would pay any sum of money should he help translate the book, as long as I had delivered it to him and he reads it directly to me. I couldn't risk losing this book in the mail, and besides, Natchez was right on the route to the Louisiana house. I had fetched reading Robert's journal about 2 weeks ago. He wrote about the dreams I heard, the burden to bear he was affecting his family life. Robert went knocking on one of his tenants' doors after not hearing from him but recent read for weeks. He had let himself in and found him there, wrist slit in the bathtub. Apparently a pair of his old jeans were laying on the bathroom floor, and in a pocket Robert found a picture of the Louisiana house, with the address hastily scribbled on the back of it. I found it curious that made no mention of where he found the other book though. Robert, although knows about what exactly Ubloo was trying to do, he seems to believe it was some vengeful spirit feeding on nightmares or fear. The truth be told, his journal wasn't too useful. It was simply a recording of everything that had been done in a curse. I snapped out my fingers just in time to hear scream, K ka-thump, and then a big crash as my windshield speared web inward. I swerved out of impact and lost control of the car. It veered off the highway and down the embark, throwing the woman from my hood and sending her ragdolling across the landscape until she was stopped by a tree, and I heard spine snap from the wind splash with a sharp pop. My car finally slided to a stop, and then I heard him. Heard, oh my God, Marty! An elderly man was running down the embark, now over to where the woman lay. Mary, sweet, please! He knelt down and crushed her head in his arms. Her legs twisted into sickening shapes. He tried to look at me, still in shock. Kernels weight from gripping the steering wheel. It wasn't until I had a half moment to collect myself that I realized the gravity of what just happened. Back up! I'm a doctor, I yelled, opening the door and running halfway over to the man. She's dead, you idiot! You killed her! That old man sobbed into the hair on the top of his wife's head. I stopped halfway between my car and the tree. The two of them couldn't have been younger than 70. A little up the road I noticed a car pulled off to the side. This must have been broken down or gotten a flat. She was probably trying to flag me down, or maybe just standing too far into the lane. I'm sorry. I I stumbled out, choking up. I wasn't paying attention. You were friggin' drunk, you idiot, he snapped back at me. A drunk, just like your old man that was killed. That killed him, and what killed your mother too. I was taken back by this. No, that is not true. It is. The old man reached behind his back and pulled out a revolver. Look at what you've done, boy. It's all your fault. And what that? He choked, cocked the revolver, put it in his mouth, and I watched his brains splatter out the back of his head and a burst of color. I stood there in shock, listening to the still silence of the aftermath. I scratched the back of my head and straight out the man and woman. How the frig am I going to get out of this? I scratched the back of my head. Again, what an odd moment for it to be ticking like this. Then I felt my hair ruffle. I spun on my heel, stumped and scared, and there he was, his long trunk trailing back towards his head. Out of it, he showed me those dark, weak, horrible eyes, so black I could not see reflection in them. Reflection of me standing there, frozen in fear. He bubbled up on his legs and back down almost gracefully, his head cocked to the side just a fraction of an inch, which any moment I heard it. Ubloo! I woke up to a gasp of hot, still air. The world came back to me slowly as I drank in my surroundings, and then everything flooded back at once. I had pulled over at a rest stop just outside Nearest to take a leak and grab a coffee. I must just have fallen asleep in the car. Frig! I stumbled my hand onto the steering wheel. I must have had at least 50 dreams with the thing, and yet he still managed to catch me off guard. I managed to into my center console and pulled out the bottle of Adderall. I threw it into my mouth and forced them down with a swig of gin. For a second, I sat there, head against the steering wheel, fighting off my thoughts, and then I turned the key and started the car, and left the rest stop parking lot. It just me about another half hour to get to where Eli lived. His house was large and old from the looks of it. His driveway was much longer than I was used to. The land surrounding his house stretched on for what seemed for like forever. I guess city living has made a place like this seem unnatural to me. I drove my car to the front of his house, and he came outside and waved. He, he had been expecting me. I called him when I just was about 2 minutes out. He was about my height and much older, in his late 60s. He had a full head of white hair and a white goatee to match it. His skin was wrinkled and he had a pair of half-framed glasses resting on his nose. He lit up a cigarette as I got out of the car and stretched my legs. "Afternoon, doctor," he called from his steps. "I must say I've been mighty looking forward to this book yours. Can I find much that has been found already? And if I have the chance to translate some new discovery, well, I guess we could call us even." He spoke with a thick Mississippi accent, but he was understandable. He looked over for a few seconds, and again, My, you look terrible, doctor. Long drive?" he asked me, with a tone of scrutiny. "Just a rough night." I couldn't help but smile at that. I opened the back door of my car and pulled the book out of its box. I shut the door and then studied the cover. One last time in my mystery, I walked over to Eli. "Here she is," I said, handing over the book. Eli took the book in his hands and pushed his glasses up to get a better look. He scratched at the cover in the sunlight for about 3 seconds before I saw his eyes widen and his mouth open slightly. "Doctor," he said graciously, "where did you find this?" "It was given to me by a friend," I lied, but only half. "Why, what's it called?" Eli turned and stared at me for a long time, and I could almost see the glares in his head turn as he started to realize just why I looked so haggard. "It's a religious text," he started, his voice wavering. "Writ- Written by a witch doctor from the Burunian tribe." "Witch doctor? Witch doctor?" I asked curiously. "Like voodoo?" "Yes, doctor." Eli turned, looked at me, and he spoke. "But not just any voodoo. The Burunian tribe, and most suspectedly this witch doctor was referred to in African folklore as one of the most ruthless in history." We stood there for a moment together on his footsteps, with only the sound of the wind to keep us company. "Well, Doctor," Eli began, "let's go inside and make sure this ain't a fake before we jump to such rash conclusions." We went inside together. Eli brought me to his study. He began examining the book, the text, the paper, everything. While he did this, he had me running about doing various tasks for him, pulling samples from his filing cabinets, looking up texts that he didn't have on the internet, fetching sweet tea from the fridge. After all 2 hours, he finally sat back in his chair and turned to look at me. "Gosh almighty, Doctor! This is the real deal!" I was overjoyed to hear this. The truth be told, I hadn't even considered the possibility that the text was fake, and now I was just minutes from answering about Ubloo, about how to stop or kill him. I finally felt a weight lift suddenly of a shoulder. "So, I tell you what," Eli began. "I got a guest bed upstairs. If you have nowheres else to be, you can shake up with me here, and we can translate this book in, I don't know, 3 days?" My stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, Eli, but that's too much time." He looked back up at me again. "I need to be back on the road by sundown." He looked surprised, and rightfully so. "Hell, boy, you look like you haven't slept in days. Surely you could take one night off from the road." "I'm sorry, but I'm running out of time." I got up and walked over to where Eli had the book. "May I?" "Well, of course, Doctor. It is yours after all." I flipped through the pages to the chapter I needed. "Not anymore, Eli," I said as I got closer to the text I had to hear. "Once I leave, this is yours. Do whatever you like with it." I stopped finally on the page I needed. A crude picture of Ubloo stared up at me surrounded by text. "Please do this, the text I need," I said before he could ask anything. Eli turned down to the page and read in silence for a few minutes. And he did. I could not see him understand what he was finally doing. He turned and looked at me with big, sad eyes. "How long?" he asked. "About 2 months," I said back, my heart beating with finally being able to tell someone who would understand. "Jesus!" he said, trailing off, and then, "One moment, Doctor." He got up and to the kitchen and came back with a tray on it, 2 glasses full of ice, and a bottle of what looked like whiskey. I laughed, and for just a second I felt human again. Eli poured me a glass, then him, and we drank together in silence. So now you understand why I can't stay, I finally said. I do, Doctor. Now you might want to sit down for this, because it's quite a long story. I took a seat next to Eli and braced myself, heart racing for what was coming next. This creature, this thing, is called Dila Bul Ubla. Dila the Ubla? I asked curiously, feeling odd that these people didn't come up with the same name both Robert and Andrew had. Yes, yes, Dila Ubla. This translates to the one who shows. A shiver down my spine as Eli continued on. It says here that their witch doctor was very powerful, and that his people, the Bamuni tribe, were being trusted across the desert by a rival clan. Rather that its clan hunt down and betrayal, they sent their best warriors into the Rini camp at night, slaughtered them in their sleep. The witch doctor was away praying to the gods for his people to escape, but the gods had abandoned him for using voodoo to defeat his enemies, and his prayers were not answered. When he returned to the camp, he found all of his tribe slaughtered in their beds, including his wife, who was with child. This witch doctor was overcome with great and hatred and turned to his most powerful voodoo to extract vengeance on the rival clan, and abandoned the gods that turned his back on him. He gathered everything of his could found left behind by the raid. Elephant tusks, snakes, skins, animal bones, and anything that had any synthetic properties. He pulled them together with the bones of his fallen tribe and buried them all, chanting a voodoo curse, all the while a curse to be placed on the rival clan to summon a spirit that would hunt for sleep. They would have hunted his tribes. Eli stopped and looked up at me. Do you want me to keep going, Doctor? I took a sip of whiskey and slightly nodded. In a matter of days, the rival clan were all having horrific nightmares and could not sleep. The damage of being rathered by other tribes, seeing the women and children raped and enslaved, of corpse burning by seasons, and the never ended. Before long, the clan turned on each other or took their own lives, until none remained. But sometimes something went wrong. When the witch doctor heard the clan was destroyed, he celebrated, but he continued to hear of his people affected by one who shows. The best variant could not be stopped for it. He had attempted for despair. This could not be satisfied. One by one, people would not be affected by the spirit, and that they died. It would pass on to another, and so on and so on. He stopped and looked back up at me and started. Well, could they stop it? I asked. It doesn't say, Eli said through his sadness. It says that the tribes began to exile anyone who contributed the deadly spirit, for it was impossible to fight, leaving the spirit to be contracted by a different tribe. My stomach dropped entirely. With this, it's no escape for me. I'm going to have to deal with Ubloo for as long as I live, or as short as I live. I see now why Andrew and Robert took their lives. My eyes began to well up, and Eli pressured me another glass of whiskey. I understand if you want to get back on the road, Doctor. I keep translating, and I'll call you if anything that helps. I guided down the whiskey and one and wiped my eyes on my sleeve. Thanks, Eli. I frisked out. Let me know. I'll sew myself out. I got up before he could stop me and head for the front door. Before I could get down to my car, Eli was in the doorway and called out to me. Doctor! Just where is it you're going? If you don't mind me asking? He said. This sadness on his voice made the question hang in the evening air. To follow a dead man's footsteps, I answered. The led to somewheres in Louisiana. Eli stared back at me, and his eyes began to well up in tears. Well, I wish you the best, Doctor. I can't imagine the things you've seen, and I won't pretend to. But God bless you for fighting. I nodded and opened up my car door, but stopped and looked up at Eli. Dila boo mumula, I said with a half laugh. That was a lot better than what I've been calling it. What have you been calling it, Doctor? I stopped for a second, and the thought just of how the name I felt was. Ubloo, I said with a half smile. Ubloo? Eli looked at me confused. Yeah, that was it. Always said to me, right at the end of a dream. I hesitated. Does it mean anything? Eli looked down at me with a stare I would never forget, a look in his eyes that I knew he would never give to another man in his life, and he said, Yes, Doctor. Ubloo is short for Ubaloo. Then wind blew gently between us. The grass stayed in the wind, swirling as I walked. What would most likely be the last thing I'd ever hear from him. It means, wake up!